The only test of leadership is that somebody follows voluntarily. Robert K. Greenleaf, 1904 to 1990. Throughout the centuries of human history, there have appeared in our midst a number of people whom we have recognized as leaders. Some have led through the use of coercive power and force. For many, then, leadership has meant, I lead, you follow, ask questions later, if at all. Sometimes this has resulted in people being led to places they would rather not have gone. And yet other leaders have shown us another way. The leaders you see here were somehow different, unique, successful, remembered well, and each, in their way, has shown certain special characteristics which we find today in servant leadership. Servant leadership. To some, the phrase may seem to be an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. To others, the phrase servant leadership presents an enticing paradox worthy of exploration. What does servant leadership mean? In 1970, retired AT&T executive Robert K. Greenleaf coined the term servant leadership to describe a kind of leadership he felt was largely missing from most modern organizations. The concept became clear to him as a result of his reading Nobel Prize winner Hermann Hesse's short novel, The Journey to the East. In that story, a group of seekers set off on a pilgrimage. Along the way, the group's faithful servant, Leo, suddenly disappears. With Leo gone, the group begins to disintegrate. Quarrels break out, and their once cooperative and noble effort fails. In the end, the servant Leo turns out, in truth, to have been their unrecognized leader. Without Leo, Hess writes, without his enthusiasm for our great undertaking, the undertaking itself seemed in some mysterious way to lose meaning. For Leo, while serving, had also provided the vision. He had enabled those on the journey to see and act and grow beyond themselves. Such is the nature of true leadership, servant leadership. Not long after his encounter with Hesse's novel, Robert Greenleaf was able to synthesize what his intuition and experience with years of organizational leadership and training had taught him. The servant leader is servant first. It begins with a natural feeling that one wants to serve. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant. First, to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? The implications of Greenleaf's conclusions about servant leadership are important and exciting. Robert K. Greenleaf came up with a vision of a new type of leadership, a type of leadership that is philosophically elegant, and yet down-to-earth and highly practical. As those who have tried it know, and they are many, servant leadership works. Though not a quick fix, it is both simple to grasp and easy to begin practicing. As we noted at the beginning of our program, many leaders throughout history have shown characteristics of what we can now call servant leadership. Identifying these characteristics has been the recent work of Larry Spears, Chief Executive Officer of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. Briefly stated, 10 characteristics of the servant leader are listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, building community. The first characteristic of the servant leader is listening. Listening is quite different from merely hearing. Hearing is passive. We hear without intention. We hear traffic and sirens, children playing and dogs barking, boom boxes and elevator music. In fact, we even hear when we're sleeping. Hearing is that passive. But listening is active. It is an act of the will. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel understood this. He said, "To be human is to be involved, to act and to react, to wonder and to respond. Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation." Listening requires a commitment. The servant leader listens to identify the will of a person or of a group so as to make effective decisions, decisions that will be followed upon by voluntary and creative action. Pope John the 23rd was a leader who intentionally listened. Pope John's convening of the Second Vatican Council in 1962 is a perfect example of a leadership style that embraces listening. It had been nearly 100 years since the worldwide leadership of the Roman Catholic Church had gathered together for such a council. Pope John's desire to listen and his encouragement of others to listen as well led to a major revitalization of the world's largest organization. Pope John died before the council concluded its business. But his example of listening while leading has influenced human history ever since. How well do you listen? In your leadership, do you take care to make sure that everyone is heard from? Do you ask questions to get at other people's ideas? Do you summarize and reflect back what you have heard? The second characteristic of the servant leader is empathy. Empathy is not the same as sympathy. A leader who is empathetic not only feels or expresses concern for others, which is sympathy, but actually identifies with the concerns of others so as to better understand and lead. All people need to be accepted and recognized for their special talents and unique spirits. Knowing this, the servant leader assumes the good intentions of co-workers and accepts them all as people of value and worth, even when the servant leader, for the good of the organization, cannot accept certain behaviors or levels of performance. People fail. Servant leaders fail. But by exercising empathy, the servant leader can help others to see the origins and consequences of their actions in a productive way, a way that has promise for the future. Servant leaders also affirm that which in every person is good. The servant leader knows and celebrates that we are all in this together and that we are all trying to do our best. Eleanor Roosevelt, while inspecting armed forces hospitals in the South Pacific Theater during World War II, impressed another great leader, Admiral Halsey, with her empathetic leadership. Admiral Halsey reported, "When I say that she inspected those hospitals, I don't mean she shook hands with the chief medical officer, glanced into a sun parlor, and left. I mean that she went into every ward, stopped at every bed, and spoke to every patient. What was his name? How did he feel? How could she help each and every one to continue on with the job at hand?" On the home front, Eleanor took a similar empathetic leadership role in countering negative attitudes towards women who were working outside the home. She was a central figure in securing government funds for daycare centers and in getting local cities and towns to provide after-school programs and community laundries. Hers was an empathetic leadership. Do you, as you lead, consciously and consistently recognize the efforts of your coworkers? Do they feel that you understand what they put into their work, what their frustrations are, what their needs are? At the same time, do your coworkers feel they can experiment with their jobs, try something new? Do they feel they can safely admit to and learn from their mistakes and not, out of fear, feel the need to attempt to cover up mistakes? For that matter, do you as a leader admit to your own mistakes? Are you open to constructive criticism yourself? Finally, remember that the practice of empathy is neither patronizing nor condescending. It does not suggest a lowering of standards or expectations. Instead, it is a characteristic that suggests a leader's true sense of inner strength. The third characteristic of the servant leader is healing. This characteristic is especially important when it comes to working relationships. The servant leader knows that we have all been wounded by life and that there are opportunities then that the servant leader will have to help restore wholeness in both individuals and groups. It may surprise us to think that Mother Teresa, for all her good and charitable works, was also a skilled and able organizational leader. In her lifetime, Mother Teresa opened over 50 schools, orphanages, and houses for the poor. She was also an example of a leader who practiced healing in the broadest sense. She once said, "Try to give unconditionally whatever a person needs in the moment. The point is to do something, however small, and show you care through your actions." Not all of us are called to do the work that Mother Teresa was called to do, but the way in which she led and served still applies. Healing is part of servant leadership, part of making sure that other people's priority needs are being served. So as you lead, look to see if there are wounds that need tending, like conflicts between coworkers or problems at home. This does not mean that you take on the stress of other people's problems. That is neither helpful nor healthy. Rather, the servant leader will try to be a non-anxious presence, recognizing and naming the problem and being willing to help people to resolve conflicts on their own. The fourth characteristic of the servant leader is awareness. Awareness can be defined as the ability to see things as they really are. This involves awareness of self as well as awareness of situations. Making a commitment to foster awareness can be scary. You never know what you may discover. Again, Robert Greenleaf. Awareness is not a giver of solace. It is just the opposite. It is a disturber, an awakener. Awareness is powerful. It leads to knowledge, and knowledge is powerful. And yet when people are kept in the dark, their performance suffers. Even when painful, the results of sharing knowledge are invariably and inevitably positive. Awareness has its own rewards. In the words of Lao Tse, the 6th century Chinese philosopher and founder of Taoism, the leader does not hoard. The more he does for others, the more he has for himself. The more he gives to others, the more his own bounty increases. Cautious, he values his words. When his work is completed and his affairs are finished, the people say, "We are like this by ourselves." We turn now to the servant leader characteristic of persuasion. Many parents and teachers can tell you that while coercion may bring at most short-term results, it is through persuasion that lasting and positive change is achieved. Seeking to convince rather than pulling rank is one of the clearest distinctions between authoritarian leadership and servant leadership. Persuasion is an honest and healthy process whereby the leader, as Robert Greenleaf says, takes the risk of going out ahead to show the way. Others follow voluntarily because they are persuaded that the leader's path is a right one and probably better than they could devise for themselves. Along the way, both leader and follower respect the integrity and allow the autonomy of the other. John Woolman, an American Quaker who lived through the middle years of the 18th century, used the power of persuasion to bring about an end to the practice of slavery among his fellow Quakers. Woolman was not a strong man physically, but he was persistent. He accomplished his mission by journeying up and down the East Coast on foot or horseback for nearly 30 years. He visited with Quaker slaveholders time and again, man by man, mile by mile. He didn't inflame or incite. He asked questions. What does the owning of slaves do to you as a moral person? What kind of institution are you binding over to your children? By his questions, he led people to new answers. By 1770, nearly 100 years before the Civil War, no Quakers held slaves. Think about how you have come to accept new ideas or to try new ways of doing things. Think about how others have helped you grow. Has it been the result of coercion or manipulation? Or were you genuinely persuaded? The sixth characteristic of the servant leader is conceptualization, the ability to look at a problem or the mission of an organization from the perspective of conceptualization means thinking beyond day-to-day concerns. Many people who find themselves in positions of leadership are consumed with the need to achieve short-term operational goals, putting out fires, reacting instead of acting. Now, it would be unrealistic, if not unfair, to suggest that servant leaders should be above and beyond the stuff of day-to-day operations. But the servant leader nonetheless strives to keep the vision, the mission, the long-term goals of the organization always in mind. Through the practice of conceptualization, the servant leader sees the patterns created by the details, the art that comes as a result of the brushstrokes. Frank Lloyd Wright was a master of conceptualization. His visions of contemporary architecture continue to inspire and to exert great influence. While leading his apprentices at his Arizona workshop, Taliesin West, he always tried to pass on his respect and desire for integration and wholeness. In his autobiography, Wright gives us an insight into his dedication to the process of conceptualization. No house should ever be on any hill or on anything. It should be of the hill, belonging to it, so hill and house could live together, each the happier for the other. Frank Lloyd Wright never conceived of any project as existing in isolation, but always as part of a larger vision. The servant leader will do the same. And for all that conceptualization may appear to be an individual effort, the servant leader will also encourage others to conceptualize as well, to restate the corporate vision in their own terms, to dream their own dreams, and to add their own insights and interpretations. The next characteristic of the servant leader is foresight. Coming out of awareness and closely related to the experience of conceptualization, foresight is the ability to view the likely outcome of a given situation. Foresight is a fluid process, combining an understanding of lessons learned in the past, the realities of the present, and the consequences in the future. Foresight takes the past together with the present and projects the two of them forward. It acknowledges that future events don't just come out of nowhere, but are somehow related to things past and present. Martin Luther King was a leader who had foresight.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
No man is good enough to govern another man without that other's consent. This country, with its institutions, belongs to the people who inhabit it. When Abraham Lincoln said those words, he was talking about stewardship, the next characteristic displayed by the servant leader. How we use and take care of what has been placed in our trust is what stewardship is all about. In the broadest sense, all human beings are stewards. For example, both religion and environmental science have provided us with the insight that we are all stewards of our planet and of its resources. We have been entrusted with the care of the earth. The earth, in turn, supports us and gives us life. This understanding, then, affects our attitude towards how we use what the earth has provided. The same is true with our people, our organizations, and our institutions. As leaders, especially as servant leaders, we recognize that we are stewards. We have been entrusted with that which ultimately belongs to others, whether it's the talents of our co-workers, the resources of our corporations, or the ideals of our institutions. We must honor that trust by being good stewards. Servant leaders believe that people have an intrinsic value, and they treat them accordingly. Therefore, the servant leader will do everything within his or her power to nurture the personal, spiritual, and professional growth of co-workers. In practice, this means such actions as providing resources and opportunities for continuing education and training, taking a personal and respectful interest in the ideas and suggestions of everyone, encouraging co-worker involvement in decision-making, and actively assisting laid-off co-workers to find other employment. to name just a few. Although it is true that each person is individually responsible for personal growth, leadership in this area can be vital. Vince Lombardi was clearly committed to the growth of his players. Perhaps the least appreciated aspect of Lombardi's leadership style was the way he encouraged his players to think for themselves and to respond intelligently to whatever they confronted. Even the offensive linemen called their own blocking assignments at the line. Lombardi himself said, "Leadership is not so much leading as having the people led accept it." And you do that by being committed to their growth. It was no accident, then, that so many of Lombardi's Packers went on to become independent thinkers and successful businessmen when their playing days ended. The 10th and final characteristic of the servant leader is building community. More and more these days, people are aware of the lack of and the need for this sense and support of community. The servant leader recognizes that our move towards larger and larger organizations and institutions has led, to some extent, to this current situation. And yet, the servant leader also recognizes that creative and supportive community building can take place within these very same organizations and institutions. And when building community happens, the effects will not only be seen within, but will extend far beyond. Servant leadership promotes opportunities for corporate success because people work and live best in a community where they genuinely serve each other's needs. Kendrick B. Melrose, Chairman and CEO of the Toro Company. I love being part of an organization that people love to work at and feel productive and feel appreciated, where they're proud of the company they work for. Jack Lowe Jr., CEO, TD Industries, named one of the top 5 best companies to work for by Fortune magazine. Working together while respecting the dignity of each individual, serving one another while providing service to the world, whether through our products or our works. This is the stuff of building community. So, there you have it. 10 characteristics of the servant leader. Now it's up to you. Making the commitment to become a servant leader is not only desirable, but possible. Each one of us has at least some of the 10 servant leader characteristics already within us. The first step, then, is to recognize those existing characteristics, to name them and claim them as our own, and to honor their presence by practicing them more and more. The next step is to identify those other servant leadership characteristics which we would like to develop further, and then get to work. The promise of servant leadership and the benefits of servant leadership are available to us all. Anyone can be a servant leader. You don't even need to be in a traditional leadership position in order to act as a servant leader. In fact, it may be incumbent upon us all, whoever we are, wherever we may be, to serve and lead as we can. Thank you for watching. I hope I can persuade you that servant leadership principles can not only find their way into the hard reality of the world of business, but can form the basis for a corporate success story. I've long thought that servant leadership is on the right side of evolving corporate history, and it seems to be working just fine. John C. Bogle, Senior Chairman and Founder, the Vanguard Group.